Welcome back to another episode of Imperfect Marketing. I'm your host, Kendra Corman, and today I have a fantastic and exciting guest with me. We have Courtney Elmer. She is the founder of the Effortless Life and creator of the hit podcast launch program, PodLaunch. She is a sought-after consultant, host, and speaker who's known for helping entrepreneurs embrace failure and grow through what they go through to create the greater income, influence, and impact they deserve. Welcome.
Kendra, thank you for having me. I am honored and delighted to be here.
I'm super excited to have you join me because I love podcasting, clearly, because I have the Imperfect Marketing Podcast. I'm a guest on podcasts. It's just an amazing tool for people to grow their business. So talk to me a little bit about how you go about teaching people to grow a top 100 podcast.
Yes. So, Kendra, I agree with you. Podcasting is one of the most powerful vehicles that we have today to share our thought leadership and to really use our voices to create positive change in the world in a way that social media can't do. And so about 4 years ago, I was in a place in my business where I was not getting anywhere with social media. And when I say not getting anywhere, what that looked like was spending an hour or more creating a super highly valuable post that I knew was packed with good information and that could help people. But then I would hit post and then, you'd get like 2 likes and 4 spam comments and like nobody in the DM saying, "Hey, can I work with you? Can we book a call?" And that was so frustrating because at the time in my life, I was a new mom. And my son was about 18 months old, and he was home with me full time by choice. I didn't have him in daycare. And so I was working in like the nap time pockets of the day. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to give to my business. So it was just like soul crushing when you would spend that much time creating a piece of content to get no return from it. And so I was listening to podcasts at the time. And I'd strap my son in his stroller, would go for walks in the neighborhood. I'd load him up with snacks, and I would just binge listen to podcasts. All the gurus, you name it, I listened to them, Amy Porterfield and Jenna Kutcher and James Wedmore and all the people who were telling me what I needed to do to have success with marketing. But then one day it clicked for me, Kendra, and I was like, you know what? Here I am day after day listening to these people tell me what I need to do, but I'm not paying any attention to what they're doing, which was podcasting. So then that set off this little light bulb in my brain. And I was like, I could do that. I could build my own stage. Having the format of a podcast would allow me to go deeper on topics that I wanted to go deeper on with my community and really build that trust and build that connection. So I overthought it for about 9 months. Okay, do I do this? How much time is it going to take? What if people don't listen? What if people don't like the sound of my voice? All of these things, all the little chatter that goes through our head. And I finally launched it. And when I launched my show, we had over 65 5-star reviews come in the first week. And suddenly people in my network were like, "How'd you do that? Can you teach me what you did?" This was at the height of COVID. I had launched before we saw that big wave with podcasts. Mine was on the front end of that. But by then we were all locked in our houses and people twiddling their thumbs like, "I think I'm going to start a podcast." So people were asking me, "How'd you do that?" So I started teaching them what I did, and they went out and got better results than I did. So then I was like, okay, I think we're on to something here. And so really there are 3 ingredients. Now here 4 years later, having taught this, and it's actually a method. It's our methodology now. But that's how it was born. And we've tested it time and time again with coaches and experts and consultants who want to do the same thing, who are sick and tired of the social media game. They want to reach a global audience with their message, but not just for ego. They want to do it to really create positive change and meaningful change. And so there's 3 ingredients that you really need to have a top 100 podcast. It's not a high quality mic. It's not a consistent episode release schedule. And it's not the best content on the face of the planet. What it is are 3 things that allow us as hosts to tap into the psychology of our listener. When we're clear on that, and when we can design our podcast and our content around that, then you can begin to create a podcast that people can't ignore. And when you do that, that's when it goes viral. That's when the word starts to spread and people start sharing it and start talking about it. And that bumps you up in the charts to help you get discovered. So that's super high level. I know that your listeners probably want to hear what those 3 ingredients are, but I'm going to pause right there in case you have any questions for me.
No, I think I love that. And I love tapping into your audience. That's the key. People have a tendency to skip defining who their audience is and understanding their audience. I have that discussion on a practically daily basis with people. I teach part-time. I'm adjunct faculty at a local university. I feel like I'm banging it into their heads. Target audience, target audience, target audience. We're in a class, we're working on a little mini marketing plan, and they're like, TikTok. And I'm like, tell me again who your target audience is. They're like, women 45 to, I'm like, okay, TikTok. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. So you really got to think about who your audience is and where they're at to make sure that you're talking to them. I think that's key.
So key. So key. And we don't go deep enough. This was, I may have made every mistake in the book. In the early days of my business, it was, well, I can help everybody. And that wasn't necessarily what I was going out there to market, but it was how I was marketing because I was afraid of getting nobody. Therefore, I wanted to make my message as applicable to everyone as I could.
I think we've all been there.
We've all been there. And we all know that it doesn't work because whether you've been there and you've learned from it or whether you're there right now and you're like, wait a second, this isn't working for me. We've all had to come to that hard realization. Then our brain goes, well, how do I go deeper? How do I get to know my target audience? And this is a piece that was really challenging for me for many years because I never wanted to feel boxed in. I never wanted to niche down so much that I felt like I couldn't talk about other things. And I always had this intuitive sense that really wasn't how to pick a niche. Age, were they married or single, male or female, how many kids, what career, occupation, where in the world did they live? But yet that's what we're taught to do. So that's what we do because we tend to follow in the footsteps of those who've gone before us and have done those things. They're successful. We assume, okay, we got to do those things too. And so on some deep level, I always knew that there was a different way that I needed to speak to my audience. To do that, I had to first get clear on, well, what were the problems that my ideal people were experiencing? And we've heard that too in marketing, right? Get clear on the pain points, market to the pain points sell more. And then even that has gotten a bad rap because we have these, quote unquote, bro marketers that go out there and abuse this, where they're, really using that as a tool, not for good. And I know for those listening here today, that's not your intention. That's not what you're here to do. But maybe you've shied away from doing that for fear of looking like those people who do exploit that. So when I say get clear on the problems, this is really the first step in the first pillar of a top 100 podcast. Because the first pillar is a binge-worthy content formula. And when I say binge-worthy content, I'm not just talking about the content in your episodes, because you could have the best content, but if nobody knows how good it is, they're not going to say yes to spend their time to listen. So we have to get really clear, first of all, on who our listener is, what problems are keeping them up at night, so that we can then communicate to them along the listener journey. There's 5 significant steps along the journey before they decide whether or not they want to hit play. Now, if we can tap into that and if we can start to communicate with them unconsciously, subconsciously, first of all, you're putting yourself in a category of the 1% because 99% of hosts are not doing this. Now, in order, I call these your 5 content gatekeepers because they really are that. If someone can't make it through those gates, then you're going to lose them to your competitors. Even if, let's say it's a real estate podcast. Even if you're like, well, wait a second, I teach this totally differently than Joe Smith down the street teaching real estate. But to your listener, they won't see the distinction enough. And they will have never made it inside your episodes to understand the difference. So we got to communicate to them before that point in the listener journey. So to do this, we have to be clear on the problems. And when I say clear on the problems, a lot of times we'll get clients who'll come to us, especially those with existing podcasts that aren't growing like they expected it to. They're still getting less than 100 downloads an episode. They've been podcasting a year or more. They're doing all the right things that they have been told to do to grow their audience, and nothing seems to be working. They have no idea which one of those is making an impact, if any, despite sharing that religiously on social media, sharing that with their email list, guesting on other podcasts, dabbling in SEO, right? The laundry list of things they're trying to do to grow. But what they don't realize is what's happening. They have leaky holes in their bucket. So they're losing listeners before they even get to their content. Okay. So in order to capture those listeners and to grab their attention, we first need to know specifically What does that problem look like? So when we get people coming to us, with these podcasts that aren't growing, they're like, well, my listener is a parent and they're very overwhelmed. They're stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated because they can't get their kids to listen. And I'm like, well, describe to me what that looks like. And they kind of fumble and struggle. They're like, well, they're overwhelmed, their kids just aren't listening, and they kind of repeat what they say. And I'm like, well, tell me what it looks like. If I'm watching if I'm watching a Netflix documentary about overwhelmed parents, what am I watching on the screen? What am I seeing? And so this is where we get to take it a level deeper. And we actually have to create a verbal picture of what does overwhelm look like for someone. So I always tell people, and if you're listening to this, write this down, because whether you have an existing podcast that you're looking to improve or you're thinking of starting one at some point in the future, this is going to be so key for you because it's what's going to set you apart. Feelings are not problems. Feelings are just feelings. They're just emotions that we feel as a result of a problem. So that parent might be saying to herself, gosh, I have to yell at my kids 3 times every morning to get them out the door for school on time. And even then we're running 10 minutes late. I'm honking at people trying to get down the road for traffic. My coffee's sloshing around in the car. The kids are yelling in the background. I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, did we get the homework? Did I check off all the assignments? Finally get to school, drop off the kids, give them a quick hug and a kiss, and then take a deep breath because this is the first moment I've had to myself all day. Right? That might be what overwhelm looks like for that particular parent, say, of a school-age child. For the parent of a toddler, it's going to look different. For the parent of a teenager, it's going to look different. For the parent of an adult child, hey, they might be overwhelmed too, but that's going to look different. So we have to first understand what are the problems that are causing the feeling. So if you notice yourself, and go look through your podcast description and notice if you've got any of those feeling words in there. Hey, are you someone who feels overwhelmed by the day-to-day demands of your job? Well, people think they're being specific in that, but they're not being specific enough. So take that feeling word and then ask yourself, how would I describe this if I couldn't use the word overwhelmed? And that will help you peel back that layer and get deeper. That's how you get your listeners going, oh my gosh, it's like you're inside my head right now. This is how we do it. And this is how we begin to create that subconscious demand for our content inside of our episodes. Because if your listener, if you can pinpoint, kind of like a good doctor does, pinpoint the exact problem that they're experiencing when they present all these symptoms to you. You can look at the feeling words as symptoms if you want. I'm frustrated, I'm overwhelmed, right? Those are the symptoms, but let's pinpoint the problem. Then you have their attention and you earn their trust, which we know is so, so key.
I think one of the things that you said, though, is extremely important. And that is, it's not about women 45 to 54 that live in the suburbs or, whatever that happens to be. You have to really understand your audience, because I can't picture what a woman 45 to 54 necessarily looks like living in the suburbs of a major metro area. That doesn't give me enough information. But what you describe of a woman, and through her morning routine, that's very different. I don't care how old she is, right? She is who she is. And I think that's really important. You really need to be able to visualize who your target audience is. I do that with my students all the time. I do that with all my clients. I'm like, who is your audience? And they'll start to give me owners of manufacturing companies with $100 million plus more in revenue. I'm like, okay, here's the list. Have at it. And it's like, they're not all going to hire you. Why not? Because you don't fix the problem that all of them have. So who has the problem that you need to fix? And so whether it's a podcast or a service or a product, I think it all goes the same way, right? And this is a fantastic way to take a look at your audience.
Yes. And think about it this way too. If you are someone who is, I like country music for this analogy, because country music kind of hits the nail on the head. Now, if you don't listen to country, just think Taylor Swift, okay? Because she kind of crosses all genres. But there's a reason why Taylor Swift's music resonate so much. There's a reason why she has a cult following, and it's because people see themselves in her music. And she's not just sitting there going, oh, I fell in love with someone and my heart was on fire and we were lived happily ever after. She's like, no, we were sitting on a bench and he reached out and brushed my hand and we were sipping a milkshake with 2 straws. And, it's that level of specificity and detail. There are writers who do this extremely well in their work, fiction writers especially. Jodi Picoult is one of them. Friedrich McFadden is one of them. 2 totally different genres that they write in, but they write with such detail that you're hooked because you're forming these pictures in your mind. So we can take those same principles for our singer-songwriters and for our book writers and our authors and apply that here in podcasting as well, and to your marketing as a whole, of course, but specifically in podcasting too. Because if I'm a functional medicine practitioner and I help women, let's say in that 45 to 55 age range, they're in perimenopause, they're having some different symptoms, weight that they can't lose, and they're waking up with hot flashes at night. Well, I want to know, how often are they waking up at night? How low are they turning that thermostat down? How many times a week are those hot flashes happening? Right? And specify, and that's one way we can get specific, is by adding in numbers. How much weight are they looking to lose? Because if you say, I'm here to help women lose weight and we're going to approach this holistically, well, suddenly you sound like everybody else out there who's saying something similar. But if you can say to your person, if you're someone who wakes up 2 or more times every night drenched in sweat, where you need to change the sheets if it weren't for your sleeping husband next to you, and you have to turn the thermostat down at least 5 degrees to get comfortable, peel off all your clothing, and it takes you 2 hours to fall back asleep, I can help you, right? That's more specific. And of course, I'm making this up off the top of my head, so we can even get more specific there. But you can see just by that example, it's totally different than saying you're someone in perimenopause with hot flashes versus here I am describing exactly what you're experiencing. Because then they go, oh, you understand me, you get me.
Yeah, and they're looking at it, they're like, that's me.
Yes, that's me. So this is key because when we have this information, then we can go and design a binge-worthy content formula around that. We can align those 5 content gatekeepers to attract our listener at every click of your podcast, from your cover art all the way to the moment that they click play. Then in your episode, we can begin to structure that episode to create desire and demand for what you offer, while still not giving away everything, right? Not teaching them all the how-tos, but creating demand to work with you by delivering very valuable content that's geared towards those specific problems. And that's just pillar 1 of a top 100 podcast. Once you have this, though, and we've worked with countless clients who did not have this in place before. And like I said, it's like a leaky bucket. You're losing listeners. All the growth strategies, all the launch and relaunch stuff that you can do to boost momentum, then that will actually stick. Then it will actually work. There's no point trying to grow a podcast if you've got holes in the bucket. That's just like putting more water in and then more is going to fall out. We got to plug those holes first. So we look at that psychology piece first. Then we can get into the strategy and more of that practical, tactical how-to. What do I do to get in the charts? What do I do to stay in the charts? What do I do to attract more listeners like this? And so pillar 2 is a launch and relaunch system. And that's really important because for a lot of us, when we start podcasts, what most people do is they buy the best mic they can afford. They figure out where to plug it into their computer. They Google, okay, what is a hosting provider? They pick one that's reasonable in their budget, right? Okay, $12 a month. I can afford that, right? They sign up, they set up their account. They find time on their calendar. They block off that 30 minutes or 1 hour to record some episodes. And they think, if I can just figure out how to get those episodes up and hit publish, and if my content's good enough, then people are going to find it and they're going to listen. And most of those hosts, 88% of them, in fact, are dismayed to find out that 5-6 episodes in, they're getting maybe 10 downloads, maybe 15 downloads, 0 ROI, no one saying, hey, can I work with you? Despite you giving those calls to action in every episode. And it's frustrating because you know that for as much time, energy, and effort as you are putting into this podcast, giving away your best stuff for free, not getting a return on that, that hurts. And that's when we begin to wonder to ourselves, well, am I enough of an expert? Maybe I'm not cut out for this. You begin to question your message. You begin to question your expertise. You begin to question, well, do people like my voice, right? Like we just try to grasp at straws, figuring out what could it possibly be? Where did I go wrong? Because I'm doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. When the reality is, you simply didn't have a plan or a strategy to get your podcast into the charts from day one. Now, when I say the podcast charts, what I mean is that on our podcast players, think Apple, when you open that up on your phone and you click into the marketing category or the health and fitness or self-improvement, and you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see the top 50 to 100 podcasts in that category. Depending on your phone, they'll show you the top 50 to 100. Beyond that, there might be thousands of shows in that category, but we don't see them. We only see the shows that are charting at that point in time. Podcasting has a really long way to go with SEO. We've got a long way to go to match Google or YouTube. My hope is that we will get there one day. But for right now, we can't rely as heavily on SEO on this particular platform for discoverability. Now, we've had people come to us and say, look, I just want 1 million downloads. Can you get me in the charts? What do I need to do to get there? I'm like, well, 2 things. First of all, even if I told you the steps, you'd go out there and you wouldn't get the results. Why? Because first, your heart's not in the right place. Second, you're doing this for ego, and your listeners are going to feel that. And then that's the second piece is the ego piece, where, if you're just doing this because you want to have some bragging rights, then okay, you might get in the charts, but you're not going to stay there. And so we have to look at it this way. And when I teach about getting in the charts, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about doing this to boost your self-esteem. I'm talking about getting there because that is your number one avenue and best chance that you have to get in front of potential listeners who need what you have to offer. The charts are all about discoverability. There is no algorithm on the podcast apps yet that suggests more podcasts to you that you may like based on your listening habits. Netflix does it. Disney Plus does it. All of the streaming platforms do it, but podcasting doesn't do it yet. So if we want to have the best possible chance of reaching those global listeners, we got to get on the charts. You need a strategy for doing that. The beauty of this is when you know how to do this, then you don't have to wait 2 years or 3 years of toil and sweat and tears and, feeling like you're cutting your arm open, letting it bleed all over your desk and your microphone as you record, because that is how long it might take you without a plan in place. But with this, you can get on the charts from day one. You'll know exactly how many downloads you need to stay on the charts. And then we have that valuable information that we can use to build a growth plan for the podcast long term. So a launch and relaunch system is something that, first of all, it's essential for the health and success and traction of your podcast from day one. But second of all, can be utilized again and again. You can rinse and repeat it anytime your podcast hits a plateau, because it will. It's going to. We all hit those plateaus. And those can be also really tricky because you're like, well, wait a second. I grew to this point. What made it stall all of a sudden? Why am I not seeing those downloads increase week over week? I've been getting the same number of downloads the past 4 weeks in a row, and I can't figure out why. And if you reach that plateau, then, just run this process again, and you can get that momentum back in place.
I think that one of the things that I liked most about what you just said was definitely, it's not about ego, right? You have to, if you're not authentic and you don't have a message to share, again, it doesn't have to be super inspirational, or it can be very tactical. Again, it's what you have to share. If you're not authentic in that and you're doing it for ego, everybody can tell. Everybody can see it. They can hear it. Don't do that. It's just not a good reason to have a podcast. And to be honest with you, podcasting takes too much time and effort to really be worth it. There's other ways that you can build your ego and stoke that up, right? That take a lot less time and effort.
Absolutely. And on that note, Kendra, one of the big mistakes we see people doing when they quote unquote launch their podcast is they'll go and try to buy reviews. They'll try to buy listens from people. You're going to get shadow banned by the podcasting algorithms if you do that, because Apple is very smart. They can tell if it's a real person or a robot listening to that episode. They can tell how long someone's listened to that episode. They can tell if they've gone back to listen. to that episode, if they've come back for more, those are the things that they're looking for. So this is why we dial in the psychology piece first, because when you have that, your listeners are naturally going to take the steps that the algorithm wants to see. They're going to want to follow your show. They're going to want to download those episodes. They're going to hit play, and they're not just going to listen to 30 seconds. They're going to listen to the episode till the end. They're going to come back, and if they really love your content, they're likely going to rate and review it. And so those are the things that Apple's looking for, but it's got to be genuine. So you'll shoot yourself in the foot if you try to shortcut that part of the process. The beauty is that with the launch and relaunch strategy, it's 100% authentic. It's helping engage your existing community around your launch. Think of it if you wrote a book. You would never just sit there, like hire someone on Fiverr to do the cover art, hit publish on Amazon and like sit back and, cross your fingers and hope that it becomes a bestseller. We wouldn't do that, yet that's what so many people do with their podcasts. And so we've got to have a launch strategy, but it has to be for the right intention, exactly like you said. And then from there, that data, once we launch a podcast or relaunch it, if you have an existing podcast that you never launched, or maybe one that you did, but you're ready for a momentum boost, then we can get really good data that will tell us exactly what we need to do to grow the show. Because there's over 20 different ways that you could drive traffic to a podcast. No, none of us have time to do 20 different things or add 20 more things to our list. And the beauty is when you have the data from the launch, you don't have to, because you'll know exactly which 2 or 3 things are a perfect fit for you, your time, your capacity, your energy, your desire. Because if you don't want to run Facebook ads, okay, well, you don't have to. That doesn't fit your budget, no problem. Maybe you're really just tight on time and you don't want to show up on 20 podcasts next month as a guest. Okay, you don't have to. There's different options that we could then build and customize that growth strategy. But we need some really important data first, and that is how many downloads is it going to take us to get in the charts in your category? And the launch will tell us, because let's say you launched and you got 1,000 downloads and you broke the top 100. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I never thought this would happen, right? And it's adrenaline and it's a lot of fun. And you're probably going to fall out of the charts the next week. Very normal. And our goal from there is, okay, now how do we get you back? We know it took 1,000 downloads to break the top 100. Now we're going to track over the next couple of weeks and see how many downloads are we getting week to week? Where's our ballpark? Where's our benchmark average? And then what's the gap? If your average is 300 downloads a week, okay, we got a 700 download difference to make up. How can we build the growth strategy then to help you meet that? And it makes it so easy and so clear because, first of all, you know exactly what to do to grow. You know exactly what goals you're shooting for. And you can track to see which of those things you're doing is actually having an impact. Because what most people do is when they get to the growth stage of their podcast, they just create a carbon copy of what they were doing in their marketing before. They thought their podcast was going to become the hub that replaces their time on all these other platforms. But without this strategy and this third and final piece, the long-term audience building strategy, they just wind up with, one more thing to keep up with, one more thing on their plate. Everything's working in silo and it's not working in tandem as a cohesive strategy. So these are really the 3 elements. And, we've just scratched the surface here, but binge-worthy content, a formula for creating it, that taps into the psychology of your listeners so you can communicate with them subconsciously, which is what 99% of people are not doing. Launching and relaunching to get in the charts for discoverability so you can gain that traction from day one and to get the valuable data we need to build the growth strategy. And then third and finally, the growth strategy itself. And what specifically does that look like for your show in light of your podcast goals and your business goals?
I think again, it's about being intentional. These are marketing basics that I would say 99.9% of people do not do correctly. And it goes beyond podcasting into anything that you're doing. If you prefer blog writing, again, the same stuff applies. And I think that that's really important and really insightful. And I really appreciate your time and all of the information that you've shared, Courtney. We're running close on time because, again, the data has showed that people do not like staying online with me for more than 30 minutes. But again, it's really good information. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you one question that I ask every guest. This show is called Imperfect Marketing because, as we all know, marketing is anything but a perfect science. What has been your biggest marketing lesson learned?
Kendra, this is one that maybe people have shared on the show before. Maybe it's more common than I realize. But for me, the hardest and biggest lesson that I've learned is that strategy aside, budget aside, at the end of the day, marketing comes down to trusting yourself. Because we can listen to all the experts out there tell us what to do. I just gave you a lot of great information that you can absolutely take away from this episode and go apply. And at the end of the day, you are the leader of your business. You are the host of your podcast. And too often in my own business, there were times when I gave that responsibility away. And I threw money at people to fix my problems for me, when really those decisions to make were mine. Just this year, we rebranded our website, and I had hired 2 incredible copywriters to write the site for me. And I had booked this a year in advance. I had paid my deposit, had to wait 8 or 9 months to kick off the project. And a couple of weeks before that project came to be, that date came up on the calendar, they refunded my money and canceled my contract. And it was a shock. It was like, wait a second, I just waited 9 months to have this work done. We have a deadline to get this site up and running. Now I don't have anyone to write it. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? They had some personal issues going on. I wasn't the only one they had to cancel. And of course, I understood, right? There's times when those personal things do trump our businesses. And I respected them for drawing that line in the sand instead of saying, hey, I'll write it for you and just doing a halfway job. So I appreciated that. But it put me in this predicament where I'm like, gosh, now I have to write this. And it was the best thing that ever happened for 2 reasons. One, because in hindsight, it needed to be my voice anyway. Even if they could have captured the essence of that, it had to come from my heart. Because just like we talked about a moment ago, there's got to be that energetic connection. There's that energy exchange. People can feel the authenticity. On the other hand, I realized that hiring those copywriters, as incredible as they are, and as talented as they are, and as much as I wanted them to write my site for me because they're that good, it was one of the most unfair hires I had ever made. Because at that time in my business, I was looking for them to tell me what I needed to do with my brand. And I was hoping that in them getting clarity on the copy and in going through this discovery process, the answer would have become clear. And then I could have checked the box in my brain and said, okay, problem solved. The reality was I had to go through that process. It was not their responsibility to fix my business. That was mine. And there are so many times where we don't trust ourselves enough to be the leader of our business. And yes, there's I have mentors. I've had mentors through the 8 years that I've been in business. I will always, always hire mentors when I need those people and their support in specific ways in my business. And there are some decisions that come down to you and to you alone. And that has been my biggest lesson, is learning to trust that inner voice and going for it, going with it. And then recognizing that, you know what? I can always change my mind. If I decide something that doesn't work out 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, we can pivot, we can change. And allowing yourself the freedom and the permission to do that.
I think that is hugely, hugely insightful. I love it because, yes, I talk to people all the time. I'll have a VIP day where we're going through building their marketing strategy and the tactics that are going to go along with it and then are going to reach their target audience. But I'm going to ask them, I need the information from them because they're the expert in their business. I'm just a facilitator when it comes to those VIP days. Yes, I've got years of experience and expertise and I can give them things that they may not have thought of. But a lot of that needs to come from them because, again, they're the expert in their business. They're the expert with who they like working with, who they don't like working with, and everything in between. Thank you so much again, Courtney, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, listening in, or watching wherever you are watching or listening to your podcast. We do really appreciate it. If you want to connect with Courtney, we'll of course have links in the show notes as usual. So be sure to do that if this is a path that you're looking to go down and learn from her. In the meantime, if you learned something today, it would be great and really help me out if you would rate and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. Thank you again for tuning in and have a great rest of your day.